It's a rare moment. You sit in a theatre, it's all dark. A blinding beam of light hits the giant screen, and barely 15 minutes into the film, you say to yourself, "This is a great movie." Anurag Kashyap's Gangs of Wasseypur is the only Hindi film that has made me say that. When the film released in 2012, it felt like the award seasons had already been decided. With a plutonium-dense violent opus that ran for over 5 hours, Kashyap weaved a simple revenge drama with a violent history of Wasseypur. But it's not the story that made this film great. It is the telling of that story. An epic spanning 6 decades is casted in a Shakespearean mode. It's a story of generational Hamlets, children of a slain father whose killer continuously possessed the throne. On the face of it, this film shouldn't work at all. It broke all the rules of conventional Hindi cinema. From its running time to choice of actors, from its humongous cast to the depiction of violence, Kashyap did everything that a Hindi filmmaker isn't supposed to do. And with that, he ended up making arguably the greatest Hindi film since the turn of the century. Let's examine how. Number 1. The structure. In my analysis of Rang De Basanti, I had mentioned that Gangs of Wasseypur borrowed its structure from 2 other great films. First is the Brazilian crime drama City of God, and the second is an American gangster film Goodfellas. I'm not saying that Kashyap ripped these films off. Instead, the general storytelling pattern is drawn from these 2 films. How? Like in Goodfellas and City of God, the movie opens with an important incident that will come way later in the film's regular timeline. Kashyap uses this sequence as a bait to capture audience's attention. For us, then it is not the question of how the movie is going to end, but how did we get here? We subconsciously question the importance of this particular sequence for the director to choose it at a starting point, while consciously paying attention to every single scene leading up to this particular moment. Then there's the voiceover technique.
फजलू को दिन दहाड़े काटने के बाद फैजल का दबदबा तेजी से बढ़ने लगा। जिस तरह से उसने फजलू को मारा था, लोग उससे खौफ खाने लगे।
Like in Goodfellas and City of God, the voiceover here is an omnipresent narration of a survivor. It is used to explain the key events and to introduce the main characters. This style reflects a nostalgic experience of the tough guy telling us a story of his exploits over a street corner. Apart from these 2 primary structural devices, Kashyap used the elements from some of his favorite movies to portray certain situations or characters. For example, the scene where Sardar Khan kills the Pahalwan is beautifully derived from this scene from Goodfellas. The casual chit-chat between 2 hitmen at the start of Pulp Fiction echoes this assassination scene. Faisal's playful enactment with a gun is reflection on Travis's similar daydreaming. The character Perpendicular seems to be drawn from Lil Dice. And then there are references to The Godfather. The father-son relationship between Sardar Khan and Faisal reflects that of Don Vito and Michael Corleone. Sardar Khan's assassination scene mirrors this assassination scene. And this scene, which in my opinion is quite inconsistent with both the characters and the story arc, is reminiscent to the conversation between Michael and his mother. But Kashyap's use of these references by no means make Gangs of Wasseypur a derivative or a reductive work. Instead, his application of these structural references to a culturally and historically rooted Indian story provide a universal accessibility. He takes these references and turns them into his own. But one thing that is quite unique to Indian cinema is the songs, which leads us to point number 2, the use of music. The music of Gangs of Wasseypur, composed by the brilliant Sneha Khalvankar, is heavily inspired by the traditional Indian folk music, both in its tune and the lyrics. The music serves to depict the mood along with the time period the story is moving through. For example, the migration from hometown in the 40s is scored with this ballad. The disillusion towards the government after the emergency in the 70s is captured by this song. This reggae tune of Hunter and the overtly Bollywood style reminiscent of Rahman in this song represents the decade of the 90s. The beauty of Khanwalkar's music is that it caters to the film, its mood and the character's state of mind, not to the listener. For this reason, the music of this film became famous after the release. Compare this to the music used in almost all the movies for their promotional campaigns, which hardly serve any storytelling purpose when you watch the film. Another way in which the film is scored is by the needle drop. It's a technique where instead of original music, the existing popular music is used to score the film. As the life of regular Indian people is scored by Hindi film music, Kashyap used these songs as his needle drop on several occasions to score the life of his character. It also helps in keeping track of the time period within the narrative, especially when the film moves beyond the 70s. His use of Hindi film music creates another effect. which takes us to point number 3, self-referentiality and disorientation. Despite this being a dark, gritty and realistically violent film, Kashyap never misses a chance to remind the audience that this is just a movie. And he does that by referencing popular Hindi cinema either through songs or dialogues
एक लड़का और लड़की कभी दोस्त नहीं होते।
ये तो मोनीश बहल का डायलॉग था ना?
हाँ तो
or by using the actors from Trishul to represent the family dynamics
जब तक वैद्यरामन जिंदा है संजीव कुमारी सब कुछ है।
or by this ridiculously self-conscious marriage proposal. The self-referentiality to the medium of cinema not only creates a nostalgic connection to the past, but it also disorients audience from its narrative. It takes us completely away from the center of the story and then slams back into it. The result is a sense of irony within the situation or a laugh during a matter of life and death. But the most amusing part for me was how Kashyap used the medium of cinema itself to criticize the influence of popular Hindi cinema through this beautiful dialogue. The self-referentiality and disorientation is a part of postmodernism. It was made famous in cinema by Quentin Tarantino through his second film, Pulp Fiction. But I'll talk about it some other time. Let's move on to number 4, the depiction of violence. Gangs of Wasseypur indulges in a fair share of violence. Kashyap made sure that the gruesome violence is depicted with utmost authenticity. But the menace isn't created with the gaping wounds or squirting blood. It is created with the prolonged duration of shots while the violence is played out. The opening scene of the film starts with a 3-minute long take. The tension created with the first gunfire gets tighter and tighter with each passing second. When the peak is reached, Kashyap makes his first cut without losing the tension whatsoever. The complimentary scene from inside the house is shot in a way that the audience stays with Faisal. This cleverly constructed single take displays the repercussions of violence we have already witnessed, but the tension remains the same. Another reason to shoot such a scene in single take is to create immediacy. When the director cuts to a punch or a stab, the audience has to constantly reorient themselves. A lot of time, you can lose the focus from these sort of scenes. But in a single take, the action takes place in real time.
Within the scene, if the guy is stabbing and these blood spots forming and everything, it just creates that fear. It becomes very organic and it becomes very real.
Despite its relentless pace, Gangs of Wasseypur is an under-edited film. Kashyap maintains the visual interest through staging and dynamic blocking. But the under-edited depiction of violence isn't enough. What makes the violence in Gangs of Wasseypur fascinating is number 5, the approach to violence. The sign of a great director is when she can direct her audience the way she wants. In Gangs of Wasseypur, Kashyap is directing audience's approach to the relentless generational violence. During the opening stages of the movie, the killing of Pahalwan creates a repulsive feeling, while the killing of Shahid Khan is a display of tragic inevitability. But as the movie progresses, the seriousness of these killings starts to drop. Kashyap keeps disorienting the audience either by shooting it in a comical way or by complementing a death with a needle drop. By handling each progressive death in a farcical manner, Kashyap trains the audience to become immune to this violence. This allows him to make a bigger point, that the constant exposure to violence can dilute the seriousness towards its repercussions. And once that happens, there's a danger of violence becoming just another thing. Then even the lust for war seems legitimate demand. Kashyap emphasizes this point by over-stylizing the final revenge kill. The overindulgence looks silly instead of menacing. Every bullet pushes the emotions to the point of exhaustion rather than redemption. And this is the point where the movie ends. The story of the film, which started with the murder of Shahid Khan, ends with his grandson avenging his death. But the story of Wasseypur continues. The unceremonious death of Faisal only tells us that the violence will keep moving forward. The only change will be the perpetrator. Gangs of Wasseypur isn't the story of Sardar Khan or Faisal Khan or Ramadhir Singh. It is the story of Wasseypur and its violent lifestyle. There are no main characters in the film. The character is the history and the extraordinary evolution of violence through inheritance. This film cemented Anurag Kashyap's place among the best filmmakers in the world. After the failure of Bombay Velvet, however, many questions were raised over his credibility. But the directors like Kashyap should be allowed to make mistakes. When the merchants of cinema are busy in splashing out money to make movies with the lowest common denominator, here is a man who is trying to push the boundaries of Hindi cinema with every new venture. A lone warrior fighting the beast of Bollywood. He is the only one who is taking risks, for he knows that there can't be art without risk. He is allowed to make mistakes. After all, a director doesn't crack open a 5.5 hour long movie because he's a flawed director. He does it because he's a bloody genius.